It started with footprints in the snow. They led out of the forest, across the frozen ground, and toward a remote farmhouse in Bavaria. But according to the story, there was one detail that made Andreas Gruber uneasy. The tracks went in. None came back out. Then came the noises in the attic, footsteps above the ceiling, a newspaper no one in the house had bought, a missing key, and the feeling that someone was watching the farm from somewhere close. Days later, 6 people were dead. 4 were found in the barn. 2 were found inside the house. And the killer may have stayed there afterward, feeding the animals, lighting the fire, and living among the dead. More than a century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most disturbing unsolved crimes. Tonight, we go to the lonely farm behind the woods, and into a mystery where the scariest question may not be who killed them. It may be how long the killer had already been inside. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck. Welcome to Legends and Lore, where reality and the unexplained collide. Some true crimes are horrifying because of what happened. Others are horrifying because of what happened before. The warning, the sounds, the little details that only become terrifying later. A footprint, a missing key, a noise in the dark, a stranger's newspaper on the farm. Hinterkaifeck is not a ghost story, but it feels like one, because before the murders, the house seemed to be telling the family something. Something was already there, and no one listened in time. Hinterkaifeck was not a town. It was not a village. It was a small, isolated farmstead in Bavaria, Germany. The name itself means something like behind Kaifeck, because the farm sat beyond the small hamlet of Kaifeck, removed from other homes and bordered by woods. That isolation matters. This was not a place where neighbors could glance out a window and see everything. It was rural, quiet, separated. The kind of place where sound travels oddly through trees and fields. The kind of place where, if something was wrong, help would not arrive quickly. The farm was home to Andreas Gruber, an older farmer in his 60s, his wife, Cäzilia, their widowed daughter, Viktoria Gabriel, Viktoria's young daughter, Cäzilia, her little son, Josef, and for one terrible day, the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner. Maria had only just arrived at the farm before the murders. That detail makes the case even colder. She walked into a household already under shadow, and may have died before she even understood what she had entered. By outward appearances, Hinterkaifeck was simply a working farm. Animals, barns, machinery, a family trying to keep their land running after the devastation of the First World War. But the Gruber family was not seen as warm or beloved by everyone around them. There were rumors, family tensions, dark accusations, suspicion. This was not a simple farmhouse full of innocent peace. It was a hard place, with a hard man at its center, surrounded by secrets and resentment. And then the strange things began. The most famous warning was the footprints. In the days before the murders, Andreas Gruber reportedly told neighbors that he had found tracks in the snow. They came from the woods. They crossed toward the farm. They led to the machine room, but there were no tracks leading away. That image alone could carry the whole legend. A farm surrounded by snow, a trail from the forest, a house at the end of it, and no sign that whoever made the prints ever left. Andreas also reportedly heard noises in the attic, footsteps above the rooms, movement where no one should have been. He searched, but found no one. Then there was the newspaper. A paper from Munich appeared on the property, and Andreas did not know where it had come from. At first he thought perhaps the postman had lost it, but no one nearby subscribed to that paper. There was also the matter of the missing key. Some versions say a key to the house disappeared shortly before the murders, and the former maid had reportedly left the farm months earlier after hearing strange noises in the attic and believing the place was haunted. Now, taken separately, each detail can be explained. Footprints can be misunderstood. Attics make noise. Newspapers can blow onto a property. Keys get lost. A frightened maid may exaggerate, but together they form a pattern that feels almost unbearable in hindsight. Someone may have been watching the farm. Someone may have entered the property. Someone may have known the layout. Someone may have been hiding close enough to hear the family move through their own house. Andreas told people about some of these incidents, but he did not go to the police. He did not leave. He did not evacuate his family. Maybe he thought it was nothing. Maybe he was too proud. Maybe he did not want strangers prying into his home. Maybe, on some level, he already knew that whatever was happening had come from something close. Whatever the reason, the warning signs stayed warnings until they became evidence. On March 31st, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at Hinterkaifeck. Her sister reportedly escorted her to the farm, stayed briefly, and left. That may have made Maria's sister one of the last people to see the household alive. The timing feels almost cruel. Maria had arrived to replace the former maid, the one who had reportedly left after hearing things in the attic. One maid fled the house because it felt haunted. The next arrived just in time to be murdered. That evening, something happened in the barn. Investigators later believed that 4 members of the family were lured there one by one. Andreas, his wife, Cäzilia, their daughter, Viktoria, and young Cäzilia. One by one, they entered the barn or stable area. One by one, they were killed. The likely weapon was a mattock, a heavy farming tool similar to a pickaxe or hoe. The weapon was later recovered, hidden in the loft of the barn. This was not random violence on a road. It was not a robbery gone loud in the middle of a city. It was intimate, close, silent enough that the next victim may not have known what waited. That is one of the most disturbing parts of the case. If the victims were truly lured one by one, the killer had control, or knowledge, or timing, or all three. After the 4 victims in the barn, the killer entered the house. Inside were 2-year-old Josef and Maria Baumgartner. They were killed as well. 6 people gone, a family line shattered, a maid who had arrived that same day. And then the killer did something that makes Hinterkaifeck different from almost every other crime of its kind. The killer did not immediately run. This is the detail that makes Hinterkaifeck feel less like a crime scene and more like a nightmare. After the murders, evidence suggested someone remained at the farm. The animals were fed. Food was eaten. The fireplace was used. Smoke was reportedly seen coming from the chimney after the family was already dead. Neighbors and passers-by had reasons to believe the farm was still occupied, but the people inside were not alive. That means the killer or someone may have moved through the house after the murders, past the rooms, past the bodies, through the kitchen, near the beds, into the barn, out to the animals, not in panic, not in flight, but with enough calm to keep the farm appearing normal. Imagine that farmhouse in the days after March 31st. The fields quiet, the animals still being tended, the fire giving signs of life, the house standing as if nothing had happened. But inside, 6 people were dead. It is difficult to overstate how unsettling that is. Most killers want distance. They want darkness behind them. They want a road, a train, a place to hide. But whoever killed the people at Hinterkaifeck may have remained. Why? Was the killer searching for something? Was the killer trying to delay discovery? Was the killer waiting for the right moment to leave? Was the killer someone local who knew the routines and needed the farm to look normal for a little longer? Or was the killer already so familiar with the house that staying there did not feel strange? That possibility is the one that gets under the skin. The idea that the murderer was not a stranger passing through. The idea that the killer knew the farm, knew the people, knew where things were kept, and maybe had been inside before the murders even began. By April 4th, people in the area knew something was wrong. Young Cäzilia had not been attending school. The family had missed church. Mail was piling up. The farm had gone quiet in a way that could no longer be ignored. Neighbors eventually came to check on Hinterkaifeck. Among them was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor whose name would later become tied tightly to the case. They found the bodies, 4 in the barn, 2 inside the house. The discovery was horrifying, but just as important were the details around the scene. The family's money had not been taken in a way that clearly supported robbery as the motive. Valuables remained. The killer had used a farm tool, suggesting either opportunity or familiarity with the property. The bodies in the barn suggested a sequence, a method, a trap, and the signs of someone staying afterward made everything worse. The police investigation began, but this was 1922. Forensic science was not what it is now. The crime scene was not secured the way modern investigators would expect. People moved through the property. Curiosity spread. Evidence was handled and contaminated. Fingerprints were not collected in a way that could solve the case. Later, a 2007 review by Police Academy students reportedly criticized the lack of professional forensic technique, including the failure to take fingerprints, while also noting that the original investigation had been extensive for its time. That is the tragedy of old cases. Sometimes the answer may have been there. On a handle, on a tool, on a door, on a dish, on the edge of something no one knew how to preserve. But time got to it first. And once time has a crime scene, it rarely gives it back. Hinterkaifeck has no confirmed killer, but it has always had suspects. One of the most discussed was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was a neighbor. He had reportedly had a relationship with Viktoria Gabriel. There were questions about whether he was the father of young Josef. There were disputes, resentment, and personal complications. And because he was among the people who found the bodies, his behavior during the discovery came under scrutiny. Some later claimed he seemed too familiar with the layout or knew too much about where things were. But suspicion is not proof, and Schlittenbauer was never convicted. Other suspects have been suggested over the years: robbers, vagrants, disgruntled workers, former farmhands, men connected to political violence, people with grudges. Even Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was officially reported killed in World War I, became part of some theories, with speculation that he had survived and returned. But that theory is generally treated as unlikely and remains part of the case's mythology more than its solid evidence. The problem with Hinterkaifeck is not a lack of theories. It is the lack of one final answer. The motive remains unclear. If it was robbery, why leave valuables behind? If it was revenge, whose revenge? If it was personal, why kill everyone, including children and a newly arrived maid? If it was a stranger, how did the killer know enough to lure victims and remain unnoticed? If it was someone local, how did they carry the secret for the rest of their life? And then there is the question that makes the case almost unbearable. Was the killer already hiding in or around the farm before the murders? Those attic sounds, those footprints, that missing key, that newspaper, were they warnings? Or were they the first signs of the killer moving closer? Hinterkaifeck endures because it feels like two kinds of horror at once. It is true crime. 6 real people were murdered. Their lives ended violently. Their families and community were left with grief and unanswered questions. But it is also almost gothic in its atmosphere. The isolated farm, the woods, the snow, the footsteps overhead, the stranger's newspaper, the tracks that seem to enter but not leave, the killer who may have stayed in the house. These are the elements of a ghost story. Except the ghost was human. That may be the most frightening possibility. No demon, no curse, no monster in the woods. Just a person who could wait, Watch. Enter. Hide. Kill. And then tend the fire. Feed the animals. Eat in the house. And walk away into history. The farmhouse itself was later demolished, and a memorial now stands near where it once stood. But the story did not disappear with the building. It stayed. Because Hinterkaifeck is not terrifying only because of the murders. It is terrifying because of the days before them. The sense that the house was already compromised. That the boundary between inside and outside had already been broken. That the family may have heard the killer moving above them and still gone to sleep. It asks a question none of us want to sit with. What if the danger is not outside the house, but already inside? More than 100 years later, Hinterkaifeck remains unsolved. The farm is gone. The people are gone. The world that produced the crime is gone. But the mystery remains. Maybe the killer was a neighbor. Maybe it was someone with a grudge. Maybe it was a robber who changed plans. Maybe it was someone the family knew. Maybe it was someone who had been watching them for days. Or maybe the most chilling answer is also the simplest. The Gruber family realized something was wrong, but not soon enough. Footprints in the snow, sounds in the attic, a missing key, a newspaper no one bought. The signs were there, but signs are only useful when you understand what they mean. And at Hinterkaifeck, by the time anyone understood, the house had gone quiet. I'm David, and this has been Legends and Lore. Tell me what you think happened at Hinterkaifeck. Was the killer a neighbor? A stranger? Someone hiding inside the house? Or does this case still have a darker answer buried in the snow? Until next time, keep your lantern lit. And if you hear footsteps above you, make sure you know who is making them.